September 18, 2015. One announcement changed the automotive industry forever. Not because a new car had been invented, not because a revolutionary technology had been introduced, but because one of the most trusted car companies in the world had been caught cheating. For years, millions of people believed they were driving environmentally friendly diesel cars. Cars that promised lower emissions, better fuel economy, and German engineering at its finest. But hidden deep inside those vehicles was a secret made of software, a few thousand lines of computer code that would wipe out more than $35 billion, destroy one of the world's most valuable brands, force CEOs to resign, send executives to prison, and become one of the biggest corporate scandals in modern history. The company wasn't a small startup. It wasn't an unknown manufacturer. It was Volkswagen, a name trusted by millions, a company that had spent decades building a reputation for quality, reliability, and honesty. But behind the famous logo, a lie had been quietly growing for years. This is the story of Dieselgate. For decades, Germany had been known for building some of the finest automobiles in the world. Mercedes-Benz, BMW, Audi, Porsche, and at the center of them all, Volkswagen. Founded in 1937, Volkswagen wasn't just another automaker. It became a symbol of German engineering. Its name literally means the people's car. From the iconic Beetle to the practical Golf, Volkswagen earned the trust of families across Europe, North America, and beyond. By the early 2000s, the company had become one of the largest automakers on Earth. Its ambition was simple: become number one, not just in Germany, not just in Europe, but in the entire world. That goal would shape every major decision the company made, including one that would eventually destroy its reputation. In the early 2000s, the automotive industry faced a major challenge. Governments around the world were tightening environmental regulations. Climate change was becoming impossible to ignore. Consumers wanted cleaner cars. Politicians demanded lower emissions. Automakers suddenly faced enormous pressure. There were only a few possible solutions: hybrid vehicles, fully electric vehicles, or cleaner diesel engines. Volkswagen chose diesel, and they were confident, very confident. The company launched an ambitious campaign called Clean Diesel. The message was everywhere: television commercials, billboards, magazine advertisements. Volkswagen promised customers something extraordinary: the power of diesel, the fuel efficiency people loved, and emissions clean enough to protect the environment. It sounded almost too good to be true, because it was. In the United States, diesel had never been especially popular. Americans often associated diesel with noisy trucks, smoke, and pollution. Volkswagen believed it could change that perception. Executives saw a massive business opportunity. If Americans accepted clean diesel, Volkswagen could dominate an entirely new market. Billions of dollars were at stake. The company invested heavily. Marketing campaigns exploded across the country. Dealerships promoted diesel models aggressively. Customers responded. Sales increased. Confidence grew. The future looked bright. But inside Volkswagen, engineers faced a problem that marketing couldn't solve. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, better known as the EPA, had extremely strict emission standards, far stricter than those in Europe. Meeting those standards, without sacrificing engine performance, fuel economy, and affordability, was incredibly difficult. Engineers worked around the clock. Months became years. Deadlines approached. Pressure intensified. Management wanted results. Failure wasn't an option, because billions of dollars and Volkswagen's global ambitions depended on success. Some engineers believed the targets couldn't be achieved with existing technology. They needed more time. Management wanted answers immediately. Inside meeting rooms, the pressure became relentless. Every missed deadline raised new questions. Every technical obstacle created new frustration. Eventually, someone proposed another solution. Not a better engine, not a revolutionary breakthrough. Software. Software that could recognize when the vehicle was being tested. Software that could temporarily reduce emissions during laboratory inspections. And once the test ended, the car would quietly return to normal driving mode, producing far more pollution than legally allowed. It sounded impossible. It sounded unethical. It sounded illegal. Yet somehow, that idea moved forward. No customer would notice. The cars would pass government testing. Volkswagen could continue advertising clean diesel. Everyone would win. At least, that's what they believed.
The software had one job: fool the test. During emissions testing, the steering wheel barely moved. The car remained on a testing machine. The wheels spun, but the vehicle wasn't actually traveling on a road. The software detected those unusual conditions. It immediately activated a special emissions mode. Nitrogen oxide emissions dropped dramatically. The vehicle passed inspection. The test ended. Everything looked perfect. But the moment the car returned to real roads, the software switched back. Engine performance improved. Fuel economy increased. But emissions skyrocketed. Some vehicles released pollution, up to 40 times above legal limits. Drivers had absolutely no idea. They believed they were helping the environment. Instead, their cars were polluting far more than the law allowed. Millions of times, every single day, across highways, cities, and neighborhoods around the world. Inside Volkswagen, the deception appeared to be working. Cars passed inspections. Sales kept growing. Executives celebrated. Profits increased. Awards followed. Customers trusted the brand. Investors rewarded the company. Everything looked perfect until a small group of independent researchers decided to ask one simple question: what if the laboratory tests didn't match reality? That question would change everything. The investigation didn't begin inside a government agency. It didn't begin inside Volkswagen, and it certainly didn't begin with a whistleblower. Instead, it started with curiosity. In 2013, a small non-profit organization called the International Council on Clean Transportation, or ICCT, wanted to promote cleaner vehicles around the world. Their goal wasn't to expose Volkswagen. They simply wanted to compare diesel emissions in Europe and the United States. To perform the study, they partnered with researchers from West Virginia University. The assignment sounded simple: test a few diesel cars, drive them on real roads, and compare the results with laboratory data. No one expected a global scandal. The research team purchased portable emissions testing equipment. Unlike laboratory machines, this equipment could travel with the car. It measured pollution while the vehicle drove through highways, city streets, mountain roads, and everyday traffic. The researchers selected 3 vehicles, 2 Volkswagens, and 1 BMW. At first, everything seemed routine. The BMW performed almost exactly as expected. Its emissions stayed close to legal limits. Then they tested the first Volkswagen. The numbers looked strange. They checked the equipment. Everything was working perfectly. They repeated the test. The results became even more confusing. The Volkswagen was producing far more nitrogen oxide than laboratory records suggested. Not 2 times more, not 5 times more. In some driving conditions, nearly 40 times the legal limit. The researchers couldn't believe it. Maybe the equipment was wrong. Maybe the weather affected the readings. Maybe they had made a mistake. So they tested again, and again, and again. Every test produced the same shocking conclusion. Something inside the vehicle behaved completely differently on real roads than it did in the laboratory. The team documented every result carefully. They weren't trying to accuse anyone. They simply wanted answers. Their findings were submitted to regulators. At first, no one believed the problem was intentional. Many assumed it was an engineering error. Perhaps the software needed updating. Perhaps the engines required recalibration. Volkswagen also offered explanations. The company suggested technical issues, unexpected conditions, minor software problems. Nothing unusual. Regulators accepted those explanations for a while, but the numbers refused to disappear. Each new investigation raised more questions. If this were just a technical problem, why were the results so consistent? Why did every laboratory test look clean, while every real-world test looked completely different? Engineers at regulatory agencies became increasingly suspicious. Something didn't add up. The gap between laboratory performance and road performance was simply too large. By now, the investigation had entered dangerous territory. Because if Volkswagen had intentionally manipulated emissions testing, it wouldn't just be a regulatory violation. It would be fraud. For more than a year, investigators pushed for answers. Volkswagen continued denying any intentional wrongdoing. Executives insisted the company was cooperating fully. Software updates were proposed. Technical fixes were discussed. But every new explanation created another unanswered question. Eventually, regulators reached a breaking point. The EPA informed Volkswagen that new diesel models would not receive certification unless the company fully explained the emissions discrepancies. This was a disaster. Without certification, Volkswagen couldn't legally sell many of its vehicles in the United States. The pressure inside the company became unbearable. Executives faced an impossible choice: continue denying everything, or admit the truth. Inside Volkswagen headquarters, meetings became increasingly tense. Lawyers, engineers, senior executives, everyone understood the consequences. If the deception became public, the financial damage could be enormous. The legal consequences could be even worse. For years, the company had proudly advertised clean diesel. Millions of customers believed they had purchased environmentally friendly vehicles. Dealerships repeated the same promises. Advertising campaigns celebrated German engineering. Awards praised Volkswagen's innovation. All of it depended on one assumption: that the cars actually met emission standards. If that assumption collapsed, everything else would collapse with it. Summer turned into early autumn. Regulators refused to back down. Evidence continued to grow. Finally, Volkswagen admitted what investigators had begun to suspect. The vehicles contained software specifically designed to detect emissions testing conditions. Once detected, the software changed the engine's behavior to reduce emissions only during the test. After testing ended, the system switched back to normal driving mode. The deception had been real. For years, on September 18, 2015, the EPA made its announcement public. Within hours, news spread across the globe. Television networks interrupted programming. Financial markets reacted immediately. Newspapers printed extra editions. The company that symbolized German engineering had admitted to cheating emissions tests. It wasn't a rumor anymore. It wasn't speculation. It was official, and this was only the beginning. Because the world still didn't know how many vehicles were affected, how many executives knew, or how much this scandal would ultimately cost. September 21, 2015. 3 days after the EPA's announcement, Wall Street opened, and within minutes, investors started selling Volkswagen shares. The stock price collapsed. Billions of dollars disappeared. Not over months, not over weeks, in a matter of hours. One of the world's most valuable automakers had suddenly become one of the market's biggest disasters. For years, Volkswagen had been seen as a symbol of precision. Now, it had become a symbol of deception. Inside Volkswagen's headquarters in Wolfsburg, Germany, the atmosphere was nothing like the confident meetings of the past. Conference rooms were filled with lawyers. Senior executives gathered behind closed doors. Phones rang constantly. Government agencies from around the world wanted answers. Investors demanded explanations. Dealers wanted guidance. Employees feared for their jobs. No one knew how deep the crisis would go. One thing was clear: this wasn't just a public relations problem anymore. It was a corporate emergency. Then, the pressure reached the very top. Martin Winterkorn, Volkswagen's powerful CEO. For years, he had been praised as one of the greatest leaders in the automotive industry. He had helped transform Volkswagen into a global giant. His goal had always been ambitious: make Volkswagen the world's #1 automaker. Now, that dream was collapsing. Just days after the scandal became public, Winterkorn announced his resignation. In his statement, he claimed he was shocked by the events. He denied personally knowing about the software, but he accepted responsibility for the crisis. For many people, his resignation raised an even bigger question. If the CEO didn't know, then who did? Because software like this doesn't appear by accident. It has to be designed, written, tested, approved, and installed somewhere inside the company. People had made deliberate decisions. The investigation was no longer about a faulty engine. It was about accountability. As regulators dug deeper, the scale of the deception became almost impossible to believe. Volkswagen admitted that the software wasn't limited to a few thousand cars. It wasn't even limited to the United States. The number kept growing. Hundreds of thousands, then millions. Eventually, the company confirmed that approximately 11 million diesel vehicles worldwide contained the defeat device. 11 million. That number stunned the world. This wasn't an isolated mistake. It was a global operation. Vehicles had been sold across Europe, North America, Asia, and other international markets. Millions of customers suddenly wondered, had they unknowingly bought a car that violated environmental laws?
Governments around the world launched investigations. The United States Department of Justice opened a criminal inquiry. The Environmental Protection Agency expanded its investigation. Authorities in Germany began searching company offices. France launched its own review. Italy followed. South Korea started testing diesel vehicles. Other countries quickly joined. What began as an American emissions investigation had become an international corporate crisis. Volkswagen now faced dozens of investigations at the same time. Every new announcement brought another legal challenge. Every new lawsuit increased the financial risk. Meanwhile, customers felt betrayed. Many had chosen Volkswagen specifically because of its clean diesel campaign. They believed they were reducing pollution. Some even paid extra for diesel models because they trusted the company's environmental claims. Now, that trust had disappeared. Dealerships were overwhelmed with questions. Could customers return their cars? Would Volkswagen fix the problem? Would fuel economy decrease after repairs? Would resale values collapse? No one had clear answers. The media covered every new development. Day after day, newspapers revealed more details. Television networks broadcast live from Volkswagen headquarters. Business analysts questioned how such a massive deception could remain hidden for years. Former employees began speaking anonymously. Industry experts shared their opinions. The scandal dominated headlines across the world. Volkswagen wasn't just defending its reputation. It was fighting for its survival. Then came another painful reality: the financial damage. Within days, Volkswagen had lost tens of billions of dollars in market value. But that was only the beginning. The company now faced government fines, customer compensation, vehicle recalls, legal settlements, criminal investigations, shareholder lawsuits. Every category added billions more to the potential cost. Financial analysts struggled to estimate the final bill. Some predicted $20 billion. Others predicted $30 billion. Eventually, the total cost would exceed $35 billion, making Dieselgate one of the most expensive corporate scandals in history. Inside the company, engineers were asked to develop software updates. Public relations teams worked around the clock. Lawyers negotiated with regulators. Executives tried to reassure investors. But one problem remained impossible to solve: trust. Once customers believe a company has lied, winning back that trust can take decades. And for Volkswagen, the hardest questions were still ahead, because investigators were beginning to ask something much more dangerous. Was this the work of a few engineers? Or was it a culture built on impossible expectations and corporate pressure? The answer could determine the future of the entire company. As investigators searched deeper, a disturbing picture began to emerge. This wasn't a bug. It wasn't a programming mistake. And it certainly wasn't an accident. The software had been carefully designed. Its only purpose was to recognize an emissions test. The moment the car detected laboratory conditions, the engine switched into a special operating mode. Emissions dropped dramatically. The vehicle passed the test. But once the test was over, everything changed. The software quietly switched back. Performance improved. Fuel economy returned. And nitrogen oxide emissions increased far beyond legal limits. This wasn't random. It was intentional. Investigators now faced an even bigger question: who approved it? Because software doesn't install itself. Someone had to request it. Someone had to approve the project. Someone had to sign off before millions of vehicles left the factory. Inside Volkswagen, finger-pointing had already begun. Some executives claimed they knew nothing. Some engineers said they were following orders. Others argued they had warned management years earlier. Everyone seemed to have a different version of the story. Finding the truth became incredibly difficult. Former engineers described an environment of relentless pressure. Deadlines were aggressive. Failure wasn't tolerated. Success wasn't optional. Volkswagen had promised the world a diesel engine that was powerful, fuel-efficient, affordable, and capable of meeting America's strict emission standards. In reality, those goals were extremely difficult to achieve at the same time. Every engineering solution came with a compromise. Cleaner emissions often reduced performance. Better performance increased emissions. Lower costs limited technical options. The company wanted all three. Its engineers struggled to deliver.
Some investigators later concluded that, rather than admitting the technology wasn't ready, the company chose another path. Instead of changing the engine, they changed the software. It solved the problem on paper, but created a much larger problem in reality. As more evidence became public, governments intensified their investigations. In the United States, federal prosecutors launched criminal cases. Search warrants were executed. Internal emails were reviewed. Thousands of company documents were examined. Investigators wanted to know whether executives had intentionally misled regulators. If they had, the consequences could include prison sentences. Meanwhile, Volkswagen's legal problems spread across the globe. Customers filed lawsuits. Shareholders claimed they had been misled. Environmental organizations demanded accountability. Countries announced recalls. Millions of vehicles now required repairs. But fixing them wasn't simple. Software updates alone often reduced engine performance. Some drivers reported lower fuel economy. Others complained about reduced acceleration. The scandal refused to disappear. Then came another historic moment. In 2017, Volkswagen agreed to one of the largest corporate settlements in American history. The company accepted responsibility for serious violations. It agreed to pay billions of dollars in criminal fines, civil penalties, environmental programs, and customer compensation. The financial cost continued to grow, year after year. By the time the dust settled, Volkswagen had spent more than $35 billion dealing with Dieselgate, an amount almost impossible to imagine. The crisis also reached individual executives. Several former Volkswagen managers faced criminal charges. Some were arrested. Others stood trial. Some received prison sentences. The scandal had moved beyond corporate penalties. Now, individual accountability had become part of the story. The message from prosecutors was clear. Corporations don't make decisions. People do. Perhaps the biggest casualty wasn't money. It was trust. For decades, Volkswagen had built its reputation on one promise: German engineering. Customers believed that promise. Dealers believed it. Governments believed it. Investors believed it. Dieselgate shattered that confidence almost overnight. One piece of software had damaged a brand built over generations. Rebuilding that reputation would take years, maybe decades. But while the world focused on Volkswagen, the entire automotive industry was quietly changing. Regulators began testing vehicles under real-world driving conditions. Laboratory-only testing was no longer enough. Automakers invested heavily in hybrid technology. Electric vehicle development accelerated. Companies realized something important. The future wasn't just about building better cars. It was about earning public trust. Still, one question remained. Could Volkswagen survive? Could a company responsible for one of the biggest corporate scandals in history ever regain the confidence of customers? Against all odds, the answer would surprise almost everyone. For many companies, a scandal like Dieselgate would have been the end. Customers lose trust. Investors disappear. Sales collapse. The brand slowly fades away. History is full of companies that never recovered. But Volkswagen refused to become one of them. The company faced a choice: spend years defending the past, or invest billions into the future. It chose the future. Almost immediately, Volkswagen announced one of the most ambitious transformations in automotive history. Instead of promoting diesel, the company shifted its focus toward electric vehicles. Factories were redesigned. Research budgets increased. Engineers were reassigned. New battery technology became a priority. Executives spoke about sustainability, transparency, and rebuilding public trust. The same company that had once promoted clean diesel was now promising an electric future. Some people welcomed the change. Others remained skeptical. Rebuilding trust proved far more difficult than rebuilding factories. Advertising campaigns could change overnight. Reputations could not. Many loyal customers felt betrayed. Some never bought another Volkswagen again. Others gave the company a second chance. The public was divided, and every new product launch reminded people of Dieselgate. The scandal had become part of Volkswagen's identity. Financially, the recovery was remarkable. Despite paying more than $35 billion in fines, settlements, recalls, and legal costs, Volkswagen survived. It continued selling millions of vehicles every year. It remained one of the world's largest automakers. Its electric vehicle division expanded rapidly. Models like the ID.3 and ID.4 became central to its new strategy. The company proved something few people expected. Even after one of the biggest corporate scandals in history, a global brand could survive. But surviving is not the same as being trusted. Years after Dieselgate, courtrooms were still hearing new cases. Former executives continued facing legal challenges. Investigations stretched across multiple countries. Shareholders pursued compensation. Customers demanded accountability. For many people, justice felt painfully slow. Corporate scandals rarely, in the day the headlines disappear. Their consequences often last for decades. Dieselgate also changed the rules of the automotive industry. Governments no longer relied only on laboratory testing. Real-world emissions testing became far more common. Environmental regulations became stricter. Independent verification increased. Automakers realized they would face much closer scrutiny than ever before. One scandal had reshaped an entire industry. But perhaps the biggest lesson wasn't about cars. It was about corporate culture. Inside many successful companies, pressure can become dangerous. When leaders demand impossible results, employees face impossible choices. Some speak up, some walk away, and some choose shortcuts. Shortcuts can solve today's problem, but they often create tomorrow's disaster. Dieselgate wasn't created by software alone. It was created by a culture where winning mattered more than honesty, where deadlines mattered more than transparency, where success became more important than integrity. That culture turned a respected company into a global warning. History has seen this pattern before. Enron, WorldCom, Theranos, Wirecard, FTX. Different industries, different technologies, different decades. The same mistake. A powerful story, a trusted brand, a culture that discouraged bad news, and eventually, a collapse. Volkswagen survived. Many others didn't. But every one of them reminds us of the same truth. No company, no matter how respected, is above accountability. Today, millions of Volkswagen vehicles still drive on roads around the world. The factories are still operating. The company continues investing billions into electric mobility. To many customers, Volkswagen represents innovation. To others, it represents one of the greatest betrayals in automotive history. Both views are understandable, because the company's history now contains two stories, one of engineering excellence and one of corporate deception. Neither can be erased. As consumers, we often believe that famous brands automatically deserve our trust. But history teaches a different lesson. Trust is never permanent. It must be earned, protected, and constantly renewed. The moment a company believes its reputation is more valuable than the truth, it begins moving toward disaster. Volkswagen learned that lesson at a cost of more than $35 billion. A cost measured not only in money, but also in credibility. The next revolutionary product, the next billion-dollar company, the next industry-changing innovation will eventually arrive. When it does, remember Dieselgate. Ask difficult questions. Demand evidence. Don't mistake clever marketing for honest engineering. Because the biggest corporate scandals rarely begin with evil intentions. They begin with small compromises. One meeting, one decision, one line of code. And before anyone realizes what's happening, the truth becomes impossible to hide. In the end, Dieselgate wasn't just about dirty engines. It was about dirty decisions. It proved that even the world's most respected companies can lose their way when ambition grows faster than integrity. And perhaps that's the most important lesson of all, because in business, a reputation takes decades to build, but only seconds to destroy. If you enjoyed this documentary, subscribe to Money Trap for more true stories about corporate fraud, business scandals, financial crimes, and the billion-dollar companies that fooled the world. Because behind every global brand, there's a story, and sometimes it's far darker than anyone imagined. Thanks for watching.